a show at the moment called Keep It Up on RTE Player, and it's all about girls in sport and keeping them in sport and why they drop out. But it's also really beneficial as a watch as an adult. It was one of the things that feedback to me, talking about self-esteem surrounding activity and sport, and this kind of thought of needing to be sporty to stay active. And it's so crucial to us and our health and our well-being, getting out and exercising. So it's something obviously I'm very passionate about. I played basketball for Ireland myself, and I'm a PE teacher by trade. And I also wrote an anti-racism policy for schools. This is just something I wanted to just share before we get stuck into the heart of everything, because it is a school's policy and it's by word of mouth that it's being shared. So I would ask any of you out there that are interested in said policy to reach out to me on Instagram. Is the easiest way to reach me. So it's Emer O'Neill 14 on Instagram. That's EMERONEILL 14. The policy is for schools and organizations, and it's just a way for you to be able to have a framework or the veins of the start of a policy that you can then make your own. Free of charge. It's just so important that we have these policies in place anywhere that is dealing with people. And it's also a good policy to have as an organization, a workplace, as a stepping stone and a starting place to ensuring that, because I'm hoping by 2024 that it'll be something that you'll see in 70% of workplaces and in schools. So I'm also a mum of I'm nearly saying 3. I'm a mum of 2. I have 1 on the way, so hopefully, fingers crossed, everything going well. So yeah, I'd like to welcome you again. It's brilliant to have you all here. And this is going to be a fabulous event. We thank Dublin Theatre Festival, especially for today, International Women's Day Celebration 2023. We're delighted you can join us, and I'm hoping for an extremely lively discussion. As part of the event today, we're asking for donations for the Irish Red Cross appeal to help victims of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria. You can visit the DTF website to donate, but I would also like to say thank you to those of you that have already donated, because we've already raised €900, which is fantastic. Derval will be putting a link into the chats there for you to be able to make donations if you haven't had a chance. It'd be great to break 1,000 and up. So as you know, our theme for this year's International Women's Day is embracing equity. And it's really funny because equity and equality people use interchangeably, I notice, and they're very different things. And you'll find too that a lot of people don't actually like the word equality, because surrounding equality is sometimes a lot of discrimination. And you find too that, minority groups actually suffer still continuously, even through the term equality. So I wanted to talk about the two of them individually really quickly, just because I think we know what things mean, but then sometimes if somebody explains something to you and you have this aha moment and you never forget it again. So this is the best way that I think I can explain the difference between the two. So equality being, we have Mary and we have Sarah, and Mary is given €100 and Sarah is given €100. Now, Mary comes from a well-to-do socioeconomic background and Sarah comes from a low socioeconomic background. Now, it is equality because we've given them both the exact same amount of money. However, with Sarah coming from a low socioeconomic background, the potential and chances are that she would need more financial support in order to make the same difference that Mary will be able to, whether it's because of a lack of access to education, support, whatever it may be. So how about then we give Sarah €200 and Mary just 100? This is then equity. So Sarah receives more money based on her needs. And there's a picture that describes it really, really well. So you have this beautiful tree in the middle, and you have 2 people on either side of the tree, and both people have the same height ladder. But one side of the tree comes down a bit closer to the ladder on one side than it does on the other. So the person on the other side can't actually reach the fruit of the tree. So they are equal in terms of having the same height in ladders, but one side still can't actually reach the fruit. So if we make that person's ladder just a little bit taller, a little bit higher, that they can access the fruit whilst keeping the other person's the same because they're well able to get the fruit, this is equity. So that's a nice just kind of image to really understand the two. You cannot have equality without equity first. And that I think is a really important thing to really think about and get your head wrapped around. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Lilith Ferreyra-Carroll. She is the National Community Development Officer at Transgender Equality Network Ireland. We also have Roise Goan. She's the Artistic Director of Artsadmin in London. We have Neasa, a TD for the Green Party Finance and Health spokesperson. And we have Roxanna, and she is an actor and a spoken word artist. And we're actually going to come to you first, Roxanna, because we are very lucky. She's going to do a spoken word performance for us now. And the name of the performance is Chucky or Mina. Roxanna, I'm going to head over to you there and leave it up to you. Take it away.
And the men screamed Chuka our law as they fought for a new Ireland, a better Ireland. They screamed Chuka our law, and we sat there and nodded our support like good little Mana. A better Ireland. A better Ireland for them or a better Ireland for all. It didn't matter right there and then. It just mattered that we had an Ireland. So Sinn Féin fall. Invite the Catholic Church round and we'll build ourselves a doll. Maybe Ireland just isn't ready for us, we thought. So we sat in silence and we listened in awe. We listened as they told us that free mother and childcare was an expense that they were not willing to give. It's up to God now whether or not the mother and child live. We couldn't have bodily autonomy, but our babies could be a commodity, sold to the Yanks without telling us where they went. Our babies were dragged away from us and we were told that they would pray for us because our bastard children could never be loved, not even by God, or so they told us. It's all for the greater glory of God. That was their motto. Meanwhile, a 15-year-old is dying, giving birth in a grotto. We've been called Jezebels and sluts and whores since this state's inception, but never more than when we fought to get access to contraception because we had the audacity to say that maybe, just fucking maybe, we like the choice not to spend our whole fertile lives carrying a baby. They made laws that dismissed us and hardly considered us, just enough to make sure that we knew our place, and that place is in the home, and a woman is just property for a man to own. They made it a law and told us that we couldn't be raped by the men that we wed. We served them in bed, and if the thought of his hands even touching you filled you with dread, and you'd rather be dead than have him beside you, well, too bad, one. You serve him, and it's his decision when he's inside you. This better Ireland, this great state fucked us raw, fucked us over with each shitty law, a constitution devoid of gra from an all. But now we say no. Fuck that. Chuka our law. Our daughters can and will have choices because we will stand up tall and raise our voices. We will make our own decisions about our bodies and not be shamed for it. We will choose whatever knickers we want to wear and not be blamed for it. For too long, we've been demonized, brutalized, patronized, blamed and slut-shamed for what we were wearing. But now we can build a better Ireland because this one needs repairing. Our new Ireland, our better Ireland will be a place that's caring. And the place of a woman won't just be a home while she's childbearing. We will be heard, we will be listened to, no more silent despairing, because we are raging, we are roaring, and we are raring. We are Manana Heron. Thank you.
Wow. Feel a bus on our pod.
Thank you.
So powerful, so passionate, so raw. Just, it must be so amazing to have the ability to be able to express yourself like that through words. I think when you are an artist like that, you probably take it for granted, but it's just phenomenal to be able to express yourself like that. What's it like having that ability?
Well, it's something that I was talking to you briefly about this yesterday, but it's something that I'd always done just for myself was just writing. Like I originally, when I was young, I wanted to be a writer and kind of got lost a little bit. But I did continue to write just for myself, for my kind of own sanity, for my mental health. And then as an actor, you have so much downtime, as you know. But so I just started to kind of feel like I don't mind working in a bar or in a coffee shop, but I felt like there was just huge periods of times where I wasn't being challenged creatively. I was still writing, but I just started to see kind of a rise in poetry and spoken word specifically. And I started to actually hear other voices. I think people, you know, when they think of poetry, they think of a certain type of person, or this is for this kind of person. But then like hearing like people like Emer, you know, like he was going viral with videos, and to hear someone who sounded like me, who came from an area like me, I started to kind of go, oh, like our stories are important. And I had always thought they were. There's never that doubt that. But I didn't realize that they connected with so many people. And another thing I briefly talked about yesterday is sometimes I feel like the more specific you are, the more truthful you are, even though you feel like your experience is so personal and unique to you, that's what connects with people. I think sometimes if you try and be too broad, people switch off. But there's something about like, you know, obviously there's a lot of fury and anger in my writing, but people are just, you know, Irish women have so much fury in them. So even though every story in that poem isn't their specific story, you know, there's different things. It connects into that kind of anger that we're all just born with and born into, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, like you said, we chatted about this, is like, I remember what it felt like to be muzzled. It's only for me in the last 4 years that I started my activist work and found my voice. But I mean, I was my mid-30s before I felt the confidence to do that. So I personally have muzzled my whole life, wanting to speak out, wanting to do and say things and make change. But I didn't have the words and I didn't have the confidence. And now that I've gained that, and I think a lot of that has to do with my kids, because I want to make a better Ireland for them. And the ideas in your head where you let people have space and you worry what others think of you,
Ladies and gentlemen, while we are still,
but you forget that, because that's actually the least important thing about life, you know, and that giving people that space in your mind, but you being able to be that voice for others. Like, I think that is one of the most rewarding aspects of things, is hearing others say, I don't know how you did it, but you literally took the words right out of my mouth. They were in my head, but I wasn't able to make them into complete sentences. So hearing you depict mother and baby homes and the life of women in Ireland in general, you know, it's so powerful. And it's so I know it's so amazing for other women to be able to use your words to help them understand their thought process and actually get their thoughts out there. And we talked a little bit yesterday. You've begun volunteering with Direct Provision, and you're also one of the founding members of East Wall for All. Tell me a little bit about your work in both, Roxanna.
Yeah, well, from East Wall, I grew up in East Wall. My family are still in East Wall, and I work in East Wall. So even though I've now moved to the dark side, the south side, to the Crumlin, but I still spend most of my time there actually. And then obviously, I mean, I always disagreed with Direct Provision. I think it's a cruel, horrible system. But it again is a thing where it just wasn't in my world, and you know, I would, you know, read about it and tweet about it, and this is outrageous. But then when everything kicked off, that in December, in early December, as probably most people saw, there was protests, and there was, you know, a couple of hundred people going to the Direct Provision Centre, opened in an old ESB office there, and people were chanting out, 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 get them out. And I just found it really scary. And like I was saying, I work in East Wall, and people were coming in, like, and like I work in a cafe, and they were going, oh, it's terrible what's happening. And it was just a horrible feeling, because I was like, what do they mean? Like, do they mean like it's terrible that they're asylum seekers are existing there, or it's terrible the protests are happening? Because I was just so against these protests. And then as the kind of couple of weeks went on, I started to chat to people, and I started to go, actually, they're the minority. The people who were protesting are the minority in East Wall. I started to find people were ashamed. Like there's always been an amazing sense of community there. It's so important and integral to East Wall. We've always been under-resourced, underfunded, so we've had to come together as a community. So just this minority are just more vocal is the thing. So a group of us came together, people I knew had kind of similar sentiments to me. And we kind of got together and like, what can we do? We made contact with the centre, we kind of chatted to them, we met with a few different politicians, and we kind of just went in, and they were actually, the management there were quite open to us coming in because it was very basic, and just we kind of just said to the residents there, like, what do you need? What can we do? Really basic things. It started off as a clothes, like, you know, they're coming from countries where they've never had a warm type of like a warm coat like here. So right, we'll get coats. The heating wasn't working. They know like heat. Right, we'll get you know water bottles. Then more kids and women, huh?
Just real basic needs not being met.
Kind of basic, yeah. And since then we have people from different kind of with different skills, different backgrounds. We had our first coffee morning last week, and it was the first time, the residents of East Wall, the older residents and generations, and the new residents came together, and we just had a really family friendly day, and coffee and cakes, and everyone got to know each other. And we're kind of making plans down the road to have different nights, evenings, kind of thing. So.
Really nice. And to be honest, I hope people who are listening and watching at the moment are getting lots of ideas for their own communities, because you actually can't underestimate the value in getting together as a community like that. And you really do see that the vile kind of hate is really and truly the minority. Thank you for that, Roxanna. Now, Neasa, I'm going to come over to you for a moment. We talked a little bit about affordable housing, because I think this kind of leads on, because we have this. I was walking actually in Dublin. Some of you may know I was at a comedy gig, and there was a racist joke told by the comedian. I called them out for it, and I went through 7 weeks of online harassment. I need a better word, because it was just ridiculous. I had between 15 and 16,000 comments online telling me that I didn't get the joke because I'm not really Irish, I'm a wannabe, I wouldn't understand the Irish humour, being told that I should go back to my own country, which is just comical to me, because I'm like, this is my country. It's the only country I've ever known. This is my home, where I was born and raised. Like, what country do you want me to go to? I don't even know what you're talking about, that I'm not Irish and people like me are ruining Ireland, that I actually am racist against Irish people. The vile nature, like, I must be the most hated woman in Ireland, and if I know it's good for me and my family, I'll get out. It was actually really, really scary. And I was walking in Dublin one night, going to a friend's party, and a man who came straight up to me in Dublin city centre and started chanting, "The Irish still need houses, the Irish still need houses." And I'm on my own, it's nighttime, and I'm just the realization that, it transfers. It's not just online stuff here, people. Like, there's a lot of brazen people and attitudes that they're not afraid to approach it, but it leads me on to the housing thing, because I do find a lot of that far right content. There's a lot of disinformation, and really, when fingers are being pointed at refugees and migrants, it's not their fault. They have a legal right to be here, as we are part of the EU, to give them safety. And I don't think people understand that. And realistically, like, they'd rather be in their own country safe, but they can't be, and if we were on the other foot, we would hope the countries would take us in, and they're not taking our houses. And the biggest issue is probably the government and how things are being handled. So I'm going to go to you then with this, Neasa.
Well, I suppose it is a good point, because the shoe was on the other foot. Like, we were the people, and nobody gets on a boat if their original home was safer. Like, nobody moves unless they have to, and if they think that there's a better life. And it is worth saying, because like East Wall is my constituency, and like the kind of rise in hate is all bound up with the housing crisis. And it's more really about, well, I suppose I don't want to give the far right the kind of out of saying that this is all about the housing crisis, because it's not. They're harnessing something that they know is a pressure point, and they are doing that very actively. They know what they're doing. That's not happening by mistake. So I kind of don't want to excuse it. And certainly like East Wall for All has been like such an incredibly like a profoundly positive movement. I was kind of going down doing like canvassing around the time of Christmas, just to see, like, to kind of take the temperature, like how is this really the vibe? Like, is this really how people feel? And I actually had that exact same experience of like waiting for somebody. We were going to go canvassing and like waiting in a cafe and like listening to people going, "This is terrible." And I was like, "Oh God, I hope they're talking about the protest being terrible." And you know, and I have to say that, yeah, and like when you talk to people one-on-one, you know, even people who I suspect, like I was knocking on doors and I was talking to people who I'm fairly certain were part of the protest. When you talk to them one-on-one, there is a kind of a natural compassion in Irish people. There's a recognition that this was our story not too long ago, and in some cases still is our story. But then, you know, when you have kind of pressure points like this, a failure in housing policy for like more than 2 decades, and people being pushed into homelessness, it is easy to kind of ramp up the rhetoric. And when you have a completely dysfunctional system like direct provision, it's also easy to harness that. And certainly, I mean, the government has to, and you know, when I say the government, I mean me, people like me, like have to hear that. And I do think that, like, I'm very aware. And so, first of all, Emer, I'm so sorry to hear that that's happening to you. And there is no excuse for it. And I'm always wary when we talk about this, the kind of the housing crisis and how it interacts with the far right, that we kind of give people permission that, oh, you're frustrated. That's understandable. No, it's never understandable. And I certainly see those protests, like, it seems to me that they're consistent, but their numbers, I'm hoping right now, aren't growing. I think in the next few months, there's a real danger that it will grow, because I think, you know, you've probably seen all the news today about the eviction ban being lifted. I think that the pressure will be continuous. And I think that also, you know, we're here talking about it on Women's Day. I think that will be put a particular pressure on women. Like, we're talking here about the difference between equality and equity. Well, like, women experience this crisis differently. Like, women often have like children to worry about, and they're not as mobile. They're more likely to be living in poverty. They're less likely to have resources. And then you'll have people who are like dealing with domestic violence, and all of that kind of stuff interacts with the housing crisis and affordable housing. And we can't forget that.
Yeah, it's like a ripple effect. And we spoke about that just in general, when it comes to sustainable living, that, you know, really with crisis, it's the women that are affected the most. Talk a little.
Absolutely. Oh, have I? Yeah. So sorry, I thought I had cut out there. Well, absolutely. Look, I suppose when I got into green politics, I felt from a gender point of view, it operated on a kind of an interesting level, that in one level it worked, you know, it spoke to me in terms of my home. Like, you know, because I am the organizer of the household, and it was very much about like my street and my local community. And I see women being like incredibly influential in that area. But I suppose, look, in terms of sustainable living, the climate crisis is something that is global, but it doesn't affect everybody the same. And again, women are more likely to to experience the climate crisis in a much more difficult way. They're in the developing world, they're much more likely to be have difficulty, you know, moving if there's things like a drought or flooding. They're more likely to be living on lower incomes. They're more likely to be affected in terms of their human rights, and that therefore they can't respond to the climate crisis. They can't adapt in the way that other cohorts can. So, you know, on a number of levels, it affects women differently, that sustainable issue. And then, of course, at the level that I'm at, which is kind of that government legislation level, there just aren't enough women here to kind of have the impact that we would want to have. And that is a huge problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I suppose too, on the other side of it too, is like, I'm taking a course at the moment, a Black Studies course in UCD. And when we think about diversity within, you know, within the minority group of women, we're at even a bigger disadvantage there in terms of getting kind of another point of view from it. And one of the girls in my class that I spoke to is doing politics and law, and I asked, will she stay here? And she's the same mix as me, African Irish. And she said, you know, probably not, because I think it's going to be more difficult for me here to move up the ladder. There are more policies in place in countries like the UK and in the US to ensure that I receive equity, right? You know, but also, so, you know, you talk a lot about a livable an active city. So what, Neasa, are your plans going forward to ensure that an access for all citizens?
Yeah, well, I suppose one thing to say is that you've highlighted a very interesting interaction there around kind of diversity and gender. There's also stuff around kind of, let's say, disability and gender. So, you know, there'd be lots of women who have disabilities who have a kind of an added challenge. And when it comes then to like literally your environment, like literally how you move around the world, like you can absolutely apply those principles to that, and you know you can apply it in a real granular way. Like we were talking the other day about, you know, what you would see, you know, in the council, because I'm coming from, you know, the DCC council, and a really good example of that is, you know, somebody highlighting that they don't feel safe at night, right? They don't feel safe at night. They need more lighting. They need more kind of feelings of security. And the council's response to that, because this, I hate to be kind of cliche, but this is a patriarchy. We still exist in a patriarchy, and certainly if you go into any county council in this country, I can guarantee you that that feeling of like, these are men at the table here making the decisions, that is, you can times it by 10. And the response from a lot of councils is, well, let's whack in a ton of like really strong lights everywhere and make people feel secure. And then you have like, hopefully, you know, maybe you might have a woman on, let's say, the Transport Policy Council or one of those kind of things who'll say, actually, that doesn't work for women, because women don't want like big, strong spotlights everywhere. Women want diffuse light throughout a city. That means that there's no shadows, not big spotlights that create big black shadows that people can jump at us. And another example is, for example, when there's like a construction, that I come from the construction sector, always like really male orientated industry. One of my big bugbears is when there's a construction site and there's the walkway beside the construction site, which is completely enclosed. And I'm constantly saying to builders who are looking at me like I'm mad, women don't like that. Women are not going to go into a walkway that is completely enclosed and I can't escape. That doesn't make sense to us, because we're always looking, you know, how can we get, and it's that kind of granular level of thinking. And then you would like to think that if there's enough of us at every single decision making, from every tidy towns right up through the council, through the government, right up to European level, and then, like, you know, running the IMF and all those, and the UN and all those kind of places, that thinking, that kind of diverse, whether it's because you're a woman or because you're from, you know, a diverse background or you have a disability, that kind of nuanced thinking and decision making is at the table, because we know that when it is at the table, the decision making gets better.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good point, because it's so important who is at the table. Like, I find that coming from an ethnic minority group, that there are constantly people at the table making decisions for me and my community that we never have a voice for or a hand in. And it's like that with, you know, women's health. With, like, at the moment I was diagnosed with hyperemesis, and I've struggled with it for nearly 3 months, and only now I've been given Caravan. But you wonder, like, why does that have to be so difficult for us? But it's because it's a round table of men making a decision on a lived experience that they will never have any idea of what that's like, to not be able to eat, to be vomiting.
Look at childcare in this country. You know, I mean, you can see it throughout the health system that it's not women at the table making these decisions. It's you know, a group of men, often older men.
Yeah, and it just shows that we as women, we have to use our voice. We have to, you know, demand a platform and a seat at that table. Thank you.
Yeah, and sometimes it's, you have to stay in the room. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is like refuse to be like, you know, I'll take your submission another time, or, you know, sometimes you just have to kind of stay there and give out.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Thank you for that, Neasa. Now, Roshi, I'm going to come to you. So you have a wealth of experience as you're a writer, a leader, a programmer, in a position to make great change within the arts, in your position. And you have experience both here in Ireland and in the UK. So I'm interested to know what comparisons and contrasts that you see in both, you know, between Ireland and the UK working in similar positions.
Yeah, it's a lot, particularly at the moment, I suppose, because there's so much change happening in Ireland, and I think there's so much change happening in the UK as well. And weirdly, in terms of like funding for the arts, I think there's a much better story happening in Ireland now than there is in the UK, where there's much greater access to funding and support. And I think, you know, at a strategic level, at a government level, there's a greater understanding now, I think, than there ever has been of the value of the arts to society. In the UK, things are very different, but I think, so, you know, the story isn't so good. There's recently been a big round of cuts to the arts, but when we think about like equity within this context, I think what is playing out is an understanding of a long-standing investment in conversations around access and conversations around equity in the arts in the UK, which are a little bit, I mean, naturally further on than they would be in Ireland, and I think the experience of that has been really, really interesting in understanding like who is talking the talk and who is walking the walk, because I think that piece around what people say they're doing, what they're actually doing, is often quite different, and also how much time and energy and space and money it takes to actually create level playing fields, you know, like actually to create spaces that are properly intersectional in terms of their politics, that respect what people have going on in their lives, that understand access from disabled perspectives, from neurodivergent perspectives, that respect the dignity of people who might have caring responsibilities at home, whose cultures might mean that they've got different things going on at different times of the year, and what those things bring to the to not just the workplace, but I think a collaborative workplace that we understand when we're talking about making performance or making theatre in particular. You know, everybody brings their full selves into the room, and what they bring into the room is their you know, their own life experience, their ancestry, what they had to deal with that particular morning, and what they're going to be going home to at the end of the day. So I think actually putting the steps in place to make sure that people are able to work in a supported manner is something that often is discussed a lot in the UK, but maybe it's still a journey that people are on in terms of making those access provisions. And I think things in Ireland now, with greater access to funding support, there's really an opportunity now for people to really think about what are the kinds of ways in which we can create equitable workplaces, in which we can create the kind of environments in which really excellent work is made in the way that we would like to make it. And I think initiatives like Safe to Create, which the Irish Theatre Institute have led on, are really fantastic for that, in terms of thinking about like, how are we actually working? Because in the arts, I mean, I think maybe it's the same for you, Emer, a little bit in sport. Like when you're kind of, when your lives are already precarious, I think issues of equity become much more glaring. Because the chances are you're already on the breadline. The chances are you already have to feel like anytime you do a project, it has to be a good news story, because you're worried about how the next one is going to happen. So within that, it's very difficult to speak up about the way we're doing things doesn't work. How can we create better systems? And I think Safe to Create, which is this initiative, is a really fantastic step in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rasha, just how do you feel like the arts can actually help in the fight for equity? What role do you see?
Well, I think if I can speak about a recent controversy at the Irish Times Irish Theatre Awards, I think where an octoroon, which for me was one of the most exciting things I've seen on an Irish stage in the longest time, which was a production. I don't know if people know about it, but it's an adaptation by an American writer called Brandon Jacob Jenkins of a play by Dion Boucicault, the Irish playwright. And like at its time, Dion Boucicault's play was critical of the rampant structural racism that existed in America at the time of the Civil War. But when we look at it now, of course, it upholds a lot of the tropes, the racist tropes of that time. So Brandon Jacob Jenkins made this adaptation that kind of takes this critical lens of, from his perspective, a kind of white canonical European playwright's view on the Civil War and racial politics at the time of the Civil War. And this play was originally presented in New York, had a successful run in London, and had its first Irish production last year. And it featured an extraordinary Irish and international cast. And some extraordinary young Irish talent in that show. And what was really interesting, a thing that happened is that a few weeks ago, the nominations for the Irish Times Theatre Awards came out, and the only acting talent recognised for that show were the two white actors in the ensemble. And I mean, it's just interesting when these things come up, right? Because like, I'm sure, you know, I wasn't in the room, but I'm sure that there was no intentional discrimination going on there. But actually what you see is that this is the moment where we have an opportunity as a sector to look at unconscious bias and how it operates. You know, racism doesn't just exist in intentional acts like the horrendous experiences you've had, which I'm so sorry for in recent weeks. It also shows up in spaces where talent is overlooked, where omissions are made, where you can't quite put your finger on it, but like when you notice that something that is understood as excellent by some people isn't understood as excellent by others, and we understand the really complicated ways in which those systems operate. And I think now is a really interesting moment for the Irish theatre sector to kind of, for us to have a shared conversation about this, and to maybe understand that we're not immune to the unconscious bias that exists in perhaps what we would understand as more conservative or establishment areas of our culture and our society, and that actually we also have a lot of work to do in terms of how we understand ourselves and what kind of processes we put in place to check those unconscious biases. I think for us, something that I've had the great privilege of experiencing through my work in the UK in the arts is how important representation is in selection and decision making. So that's from like and something like in my organization that I work in, we've been involved in since 2019 in the creation of the co-creation and co-delivery of a team authored anti-racism strategy. And I think that that's what's been really important there, is us understanding how decisions are made and who is represented in decision making, whether that's in recruitment, whether that's in thinking about what kind of work we program, what kind of artists we work with, thinking about supporting artists we do work with so that they feel that they're sharing a lived experience with people who are working with them, and thinking about how we look at the balance in everything that we do. So I think for us, we're thinking often, I mean, first for a London organization, we're thinking about representation in terms of Black people and people of the global majority being represented in everything that we do. We're also thinking about disability. We're also thinking about gender, and we're also thinking about age often, you know, because I think one of the biggest challenges, and it's a huge thing in Ireland as well, is I think that intergenerational conflict is at the root of a lot of what we're experiencing right now, and that sense of a lived understanding of the world changing and what your position in that world changing is.
Yeah, wow, some really good points there. And like, you know, I think too, it really, again, it kind of goes, because like you said, you don't believe that, let's say, the selections for the people for awards was, you know, necessarily a conscious thing, but it kind of goes back to who's at the table. And when it comes to minority groups, it's so crucial that people are represented from those groups, because they're the people that won't allow those things to happen, because it's important to them. It's something that they're passionate about and that they can see every day, you know, whereas I suppose when you don't have those experiences yourself, or if you're not close to somebody in your community or your family that is from a minority group, when it doesn't affect you, it's not really pushed to the front of your mind. And like that, you know, there's such great opportunities for places to really make those changes now. And it's that walking the walk, not just, you know, just talking about it, because you can really, like, for me, it's one of the most obvious things the lack of diversity in whatever it may be across the board. And all you have to do is look around an office to even see it, you know, and it's definitely an aspect that needs some changing. But thank you for those points. Really, really solid, really valid. Lilith, I'm going to come to you. Sorry, I've kept you waiting so long, but I'm very interested in terms of the transgender community. What areas specifically do you think need kind of the most capacity, like for in building, in order to actually see real change in your community?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of boil it down into kind of a singularity, and that's but I'd say that, you know, the main areas that really need change for the trans community would definitely be around healthcare, legal gender recognition and protections, and the banning of conversion therapy, as well as the banning of its promotion. Like when it comes to healthcare, I mean, that is also inclusive of things like sports. I mean, you mentioned like basketball there earlier on. If you look at the policy for trans people, if you want to play competitively in Ireland, you need to be sterilized surgically for in order to play, and that includes children. So that's an effective ban. Also, we've had a ban on trans people in rugby, and there's been rules introduced for the women's GAA, which requires teenagers to be on hormones in order to play, which is all well and good, but there's no healthcare for adolescents, so that's an effective ban. Also, there's a 10-year waiting list as an adult, so that's an effective ban.
Yeah, and it comes through like, we don't have bans in place, but these are the stipulations, and if that means, you know, that if you can't, you know, go by these requirements, then you will be banned. It's like, it's a way of, you know, really hindering people, but not being very transparent about it either, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it links into Irish culture, you know, like if you look at the States, you know, there's Republican politicians talking about the elimination of transgenderism. There's over 400 bills being introduced in state legislators that are effectively, you know, have been described as genocidal. But when you look at the Irish situation, I mean, we have no healthcare. You know, there's many people who do not have legal gender recognition, and it's through negligence. And I think that you know, does kind of ring true to, you know, the history of how marginalized communities and women have been treated by the state. You know, like, and the impacts. Yeah.
Sorry, you spoke a little bit about waiting lists and healthcare, like that you potentially could be on a waiting list for 10 years. Like, what are the repercussions of this? Because obviously they're going to have massive effects on mental health. That's just one area, but talk to me a little bit about that.
I mean, we're a community that has been traumatized. Like when the healthcare for adolescents collapsed a few years ago now, you know, we had a 15-year-old that died. We, you know, when you know, I work with support groups around the country, and they're, you know, peer support is where you're supposed to find friendship, community, and
right,
and help, but they've become holding places for that trauma. I mean, you know, I often say, like, when you look at the website for the National Gender Service and you go to the section that says while you wait, the first thing that it says is get a hobby.
What?
Essentially. You know, so yeah, you won't get any healthcare for a decade, but, you know, maybe, you know, learn how to make pottery or something. And when you know, and we have announcements from the HSE about, you know, that we're looking at policy and we want to create this service, but at the same time, you look at the National Gender Services research, you look at Hilary Cass's research, and they reference rapid onset gender dysphoria, which basically kind of boils transition down to some sort of social contagion, which has been roundly rebuked by all the mainstream healthcare organizations in the world. the World Health Organization has depathologized trans people, but somehow, for some reason, our clinicians feel that they know better than the World Health Organization, let alone WPATH. We have the European Professional Association for Transgender Health meeting in Kerry at the end of April, and we have GenSpect, which has been described as a conversion therapy advocacy organization running a parallel conference at the same time. This is the situation that our community is having to deal with.
As a country, are we held accountable by anybody?
Not that I can see.
Yeah, like that's the huge issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was a model of care that was created in 2016 when it came to trans health, but clinicians refused to implement it. So what's the point? Are we going to do another round of this all over again? Now, bringing in the likes of Hilary Cass, who was referenced, junk science in her reports around healthcare. The community needs to be central when it comes to healthcare. We need to be depathologized. We should have healthcare in our communities, just like everyone else. We deserve the same terrible health service that everybody else has.
I know you can't get the terrible service, let alone like anything. So talk to me about the conversion. Like, it's mind-boggling that this is even. But talk to me a little bit about it.
Well, I guess, but the aspect of that irritates me the most is that we see organizations that are based in this country, where people involved in these organizations are talking heads on our national airways, and I have to be very careful about how I phrase these things, because a lot of these people are very litigious. And it's all well and good to kind of have this legal sort of ban on conversion therapy, but we also need to be looking at how organizations are operating here and how these practices are being promoted. Often a lot of what happens with conversion therapy is it happens in families, it happens in the home. And we have organizations that basically show parents how to perform conversion therapy on kids. So,
it's very really, and like, in terms of equity, I feel like we can't even equity in the trans community because we're not there for equality. Like, I'm sorry, we can't equality because we're not there to even make the step forward to gaining equity for your community. What does standing with you in solidarity look like? Because I know a lot of people have that question on their mind.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to be a Debbie Downer, but if there is solidarity out there, it does feel like it's performative at best. I think that an exception in my experience has probably been Traveller Women, who've been some of the most amazing people in terms of solidarity with the trans community, and the feeling definitely kind of goes both ways. But we were, I've been saying this when waiting lists were 3 years. I've been saying it when they were 7 years. I've been saying it that healthcare for kids was going to collapse, and it collapsed. And I was saying that we're going to be having to wait a decade for healthcare, and that is the case, and nothing has been done. And what the answer has been to, as I say, kind of look at rapid onset gender dysphoria, and to be looking at further researches and developing these models without any input from the community, despite the World Health Organization and Ireland signed up to ICD-11, which says that trans health needs to be moved away from mental health and into sexual health, akin to pregnancy. But it's just, it's not being done. And, unfortunately, I don't see the solidarity there. I mean, the trans community has always expressed solidarity. We had solidarity when it came to marriage equality, and we were thrown under the bus. We expressed solidarity when it came to abortion rights, and we were thrown under the bus. And now, you know, the community is in a situation where you know, we are being attacked on a almost daily basis in our media. There is, you know, as I say, a genocide, according to some people, you know, beginning to happen in the US. You know, we see what's been going on in the UK with the leadership of the Conservative Party and how the trans community have been kind of used and abused in that sense. And, you know, if I'm to look at where Ireland will be in the next 5 years, I only have to look over at what is happening in the US right now, and it's not looking good.
No. Just because it's always great to have a take home, and I know this is obviously a very difficult question to answer, but like, if you could even give me one or two things that we can do to help, what would that be right now in the immediate present time? Like, what?
The most important thing is to listen. The trans people aren't being listened to. They're being talked about, they're being talked over, you know, in so many spheres of life. Our voices need to be lifted up. Our voices need to be amplified. And, you know, our wisdom and our truth needs to be believed, and we need to be seen as the experts in our own lives, and the experts in terms of our own bodily autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that's difficult. Honestly, you guys, speaking to you all, if there's a wealth of knowledge there. I think we could literally chat for hours. I would love to be honest, and start our processes in trying to make Ireland a better place. You know, we have a lot of work to do in a lot of aspects in a lot of areas, but I'm thankful for you women that are our voices, that are standing strong for us and fighting for us. And I know you'll continue to do that. And I hope that potentially people watching and listening today will take something from that and realize the strength that you have in yourself and the difference that you can make. You would be surprised what a voice could do. You can be surprised what an email to somebody can do, you know, but the thing that we must not do is nothing, because we will never see change for the better, for us as women and our community and our rights and what we deserve going forward. So again, I want to thank Dublin Theatre Festival for organising this amazing event again this year, and for our lovely speakers, and just such a beautiful way to start off our International Women's, what I believe should be month, but we'll call it International Women's Week. So thank you again. And just another shout out, just a reminder, if you would like to donate to the Red Cross Fund, that would be fantastic. I believe Derval put a link in, and I'm sure we're going to break that 1,000 today. So thank you for your generous donations. And ladies, thank you so much for your time today, and for everybody that came along to listen and watch. We appreciate you. Have a great day.